Well, my hypothesis, you never quite know. Obviously, we are doing something that people feel positive about, but our grant-making process starts with a request of the nonprofits to define how they measure success for their organization and where they are on that measurement today, where they expect to be on that measurement 2 to 3 years from now because of the grant. And so we engage, first of all, the idea of measuring themselves for, if I go back 2 or 3 years, for more than half of the nonprofits was a new idea, at least in Delaware. So there's an immediate dialogue of what can we measure? How can we measure it? And we had a lot of that conversation. We still have some of that conversation with many of our grantees. So even for those, and as I tell our nonprofits, even if what we're trying to do, and we keep our grant request process pretty simple, we want to tap into a nonprofit strategic plan that they have already discussed and engaged with their board on. And ideally, they can Xerox the 3 pages or email the 3 pages that are relevant to the request, that identify the measures that are relevant and where they are and where they expect to go, and then provide a couple pages of description as to how they're going to get there. For even those, and this came out of the applicant, the APR, even those who don't get a grant, the dialogue that we had in that process, I think has a meaningful impact on the organization. Sometimes it spurs them to actually have that conversation with their board. And so we're pleased, even if our dollars don't go there, that we can have an impact on the organization. I presume that improvement in the rating of impact in the organization for grantees is something similar, that dialogue helps them sharpen a thought process, a strategic thought process, and a strategic engagement with their board that really added value for them.
Thank you. So we've talked a little bit about a couple areas where you've had some real success in your work. And I wonder if there are any areas where you've either had some frustrations in your efforts to improve or continue to be less than completely satisfied in what you're hearing back from your grantees or your applicants.
Sure. So the second, an area we've been ranked low consistently is in the area of report and evaluation discussion. Our score actually declined from the first iteration to the second iteration, from the 47th percentile down to the 31st percentile. That was a really interesting result for us because we didn't change it. So kind of asking ourselves, why would our score decline? Well, I suppose it's possible that the whole field moved forward on us, and therefore we declined, which would be very valid. But I think our historical process was that we randomly identified 10 to 20% of our grant recipients, and then I would go out and have a meeting with them and discuss their outcomes. That's, I think, a fairly, that's not maximizing the learning that we could be doing and or sharing back with our nonprofits, our recipients. So we've kind of decided, and this is not only a product of 2 GPRs, it's also a product of having gone to the recent CEP conference in Detroit, where we were prodded on this by a number of speakers. We basically blew up the evaluation process and now went out and evaluated a whole cohort of recipients, about 43, 44 of them that had grants 2 years ago. And every one of them got a personal visit or a phone call. We accumulated those results, scored ourselves, scored each grant, how effective it was, scored ourselves, and we're about to follow the same process we did with the GPR, which is to publish those to that cohort. Here's what we learned from the process. Here's what we're changing. This evaluation process is going to go on for each cohort at about the 2-year interval. And I would hope, we'll find out in another 2 or 3 years when we do it again, that we'll see meaningful improvement on this item.
Great, thanks. This is Phil Buchanan, and I'm gonna bring in a couple of questions from participants. and obviously feel free to type in more as they come to you. But this is a skeptic who, a self-described skeptic who, paraphrasing, but basically the question is, why do we care, in the sense that what the foundation is trying to do, this person writes, is have an impact, not have grantees rate highly on a survey. Help me understand how I can convince others at my foundation that this matters. And I think this person wants to hear from both of you. So maybe if you could speak to that, and then Kevin, maybe you could add your perspective.
Sure. Valid question, and I guess my perspective would be, in particular, if your foundation has a mission, something specific it's trying to accomplish, and has elected anything short of doing all of that work itself, you have a partner or multiple partners in the field who are taking your dollars and turning them into action that's going to produce what that mission is trying to achieve. If you don't understand what those partners really think about you and your processes and whether you're adding value to them or not, beyond just dollars coming in, which is always important, I don't think maximizing your ability to execute with the dollars you have at hand. And it is particularly tricky in a foundation, as I suspect many people on the line understand. You will almost never get the truth out of someone who is a potential recipient of money. They're going to tell you they love you whether they do or they don't. So getting understanding that fine distinction between a 6.0 and a 6.2 is meaningful information, and the safety process is a great way to get at it.
Great, thanks, Kevin.
Sure. I think there echoes a lot of how we think about the grantee perception report and the value of it as well. I think the specific sort of examples that I could add to Thayer's response are all about improving the partnership between foundations and grantees. Not everybody uses that word, but if you think about the kinds of aspects that are addressed in this grantee perception report, is a grantee comfortable approaching the foundation if a problem arises? Well, that's about an opportunity to deploy resources in a way that really helps push forward work that both parties think are important. How clearly have you communicated your goals and strategies, and how clearly do grantees think that you understand their goals and strategies? That's all about mutual alignment. So there's an aspect of, for example, in the grantee perception report, of really going well beyond just sort of a popularity contest, which is meaningless in the grand scheme of creating impact, and getting at these kinds of concepts that are about a strong working relationship that allow both grantees and foundations to do their work better. And I really believe, having seen it again and again, and having worked with dozens of foundations over the course of the last decade, that those relationships, that the processes, the perceptions of impact are meaningful, both to foundations and to their grantees, and that this survey is a good way to understand, as Thayer mentioned, in an unbiased way, where you might have an opportunity to even further strengthen your work.
Great. This question is directed to you, Kevin, and it basically says you must have seen a lot of foundations. You say that that many have improved in their performance on the GPR over time. What about those who haven't? What's the difference in your observation between those who have and haven't? So I think what the question is getting at is those who've been able to have meaningful improvement versus those who have not or have slid. What are the patterns that you've seen in terms of foundations, the way they act on the results?
Sure. And of course, we do see some real examples of foundations moving the wrong direction after getting grantee perception report results. And I think there's a couple things really set apart the foundations that are making change and those that are not. One is a really clear articulation from leadership about why this matters. We just heard this question from one of the skeptics on the line today, or maybe speaking for a skeptic at her or his organization. And I think that if leadership doesn't have a strong articulation of why grantee relationships, experiences, and feedback matters, change isn't going to happen. The second kind of thing that I think really helps is when foundations choose a limited number of items to focus on. So we heard Thayer talk about just a couple that he focused on from his first survey. There's a lot in this survey. So there's really a process of winnowing that I think each foundation has to do to understand what's core to its work and to help its own organization focus on making change in the areas that are most important to that foundation. So whether that be communications or application process or understanding grantees or relationships with grantees, choosing a couple and focusing on that is really important. Thirdly, I think where I've seen great success is when individual foundations who receive these results really engage their staff and their boards in thinking about these these topics and these change efforts. No one person at a foundation really controls every aspect of a relationship with a grantee or an experience with a grantee. And so understanding how each different person and role in an organization plays into these results, and they certainly do, is really important. And getting ideas about how to improve from all of those folks is really important. So those are three things I think that really can help foundations, set apart foundations that are improving versus those that they either stay the same or get worse.
Great. The next one, maybe we go to Sarah first, and then Kevin, if you want to add anything. This person says, I'm sure we're not alone in thinking we are an unusual foundation. Can comparative data sets be tailored to be most relevant to particular foundations? Did Longwood compare itself to all funders in the data set, and was that meaningful?
So it's a great question. Of course we're all unique. And there's a dimension of that you kind of need to manage through this process. And we, one of the things I caution my trustees on as we look is this: we're not trying to become the average foundation in CEP's database. But we are trying to be as effective as we can with our dollars, and there's an important dimension of using this feedback to get better. So not only do we compare ourselves to everybody in CEP's database, we also, as they described earlier, as Kevin described earlier, had a customized set of regional, local, or locally focused foundations. I think it was 10 of them. And it was the same 10 foundations in our first and second iterations of the survey. So we could see how we changed against them and had a second, I'll call it more tailored, not a perfect match to everything we do, but a more tailored set of comparative data than the broad database.
Thanks, Sarah.
Great. Great. Anything you want to add to that, Kevin?
I would just briefly add that one of the real advantages of the online reporting system now is that we can, as Sarah was mentioning, not only show a single customized comparison for a foundation, but if there are several different aspects that are important to a foundation, we can show a few of those different customized cohorts. I was talking recently to a foundation that was focused in the education space, and they really wanted to see themselves relative to other education funders, regardless of the size of those funders. So somebody like Gates would be in their education comparative group, but they were not anywhere near the size of Gates, and they also wanted to know how they compared to other foundations of similar asset and giving parameters. And so we can create a second kind of comparison just to look at some of those structural aspects for foundations.